Court forced him to chain and whip her, but he shattered the whip and carried her away. In a dying galaxy, justice had become performance. Courtrooms were arenas, trials were spectacles. Pain was the currency of law, and fear, its language. The Makhtari court loomed over the city like a living wound, its black stone towers piercing the ashen sky. Beneath its spires, humans and lesser species alike knelt before alien overseers, their fates bartered like cheap goods. Rowan had seen it all before. He had participated once. He had survived by obeying. The whip in his hands was older than he was. Thick, oil-black leather wrapped around a cracked handle, its edge stained with the dried blood of 1,000 lost causes. It weighed more than any weapon he had ever carried, because this one demanded more than strength. It demanded betrayal. Rowan's knuckles whitened as he gripped it tighter. His boots scraped against the worn stone floor as he was summoned forward. His heart was a hammer in his chest, pounding against the cage of his ribs. His breath, shallow and sour with guilt, clouded in the cold air. He had never disobeyed this court, until today. Across the arena, the guards dragged the prisoner into view. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a predatory sound. Rowan's stomach knotted. She was barely standing, her wrists shackled before her, her steps faltering yet defiant. Emerald green skin marred by fresh bruises, black hair tangled around her face like a battle flag still flying. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, brilliant, defiant gold, burning under the grime and pain. Scylla. He had seen her once, months ago, in a marketplace raid when resistance operatives scattered like ash in the wind. Their eyes had met then, a fleeting moment across smoke and ruin. He hadn't forgotten. It seemed she hadn't either. Today, they forced him to finish what he had once refused to start. A voice cracked through the air, cold and mechanical. "Proceed!" The overseers sat high above in their thrones of carved obsidian, watching with eyeless visors, recording every twitch of muscle, every moment of hesitation. Rowan raised the whip. His muscles screamed against the command, tendons locking, breath catching halfway in his throat. The whip trembled in his hands, alive with the court's expectations. His fingers burned where the leather bit into skin, already scarred from other days, other small obediences. The first time he had yielded, it was survival. The second, guilt. The third, numbness. But numbness had a price, and today, standing before her, it was too heavy to bear. Scylla lifted her chin, though her knees threatened to collapse beneath her. Her gaze found his again, steady, piercing, unbroken. He saw no fear there. He saw a challenge. He saw faith, not in the system, not even in him maybe, but in the flicker of something greater, something both of them had nearly forgotten. Another order barked from the overseer, sharper, louder. Still Rowan did not move. Around him the crowd stirred, restless. Metal boots scraped against stone. Drone wings buzzed in warning. From the corner of his eye, Rowan caught the glint of a charged rifle, its barrel casually tracking his stance. The price of disobedience was death, worse. Those captured alive by the Makhtari weren't killed. They were broken, their minds flayed and rebuilt, hollowed out until they became silent tools of the state. Rowan tightened his jaw. Enough. In a single motion, he brought the whip down, not against her, but across his own knee. The snap of tearing leather echoed through the arena like a thunderclap. Silence fell. Even the ever-present drone hum faltered, confused. Rowan let the shredded whip fall at his feet, its broken coils curling like dead serpents on the stone. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then chaos erupted. Guards surged forward, shouting commands. Drones shifted, beams charging to searing white. Above it all, the overseers barked fragmented orders, their perfect control fracturing under the impossible. Rowan didn't wait. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, dropped the chain remains from her wrists with a single practiced jerk, and swept Scylla into his arms. She gasped, whether from pain or shock he couldn't tell. But her arms, thin and bruised, instinctively found his neck. He felt her trust in that touch. It hit harder than any blow ever could. Rowan bolted. Behind him, energy blasts struck the stone, flinging debris into the air. Each shot that missed was a promise. They didn't need him dead. They needed him broken. Ahead, the massive gate began to lower, grinding under its own ancient weight. Rowan poured everything into a final desperate sprint, boots slipping on the blood-slick floor. Sila's weight pressed against his chest, real and vital, fueling him past exhaustion. They dove through just before the gate crashed shut with an earth-shaking roar. Outside, the city unfolded like a nightmare. Narrow, jagged streets twisted between broken towers, neon signs flickering in alien tongues. Surveillance drones buzzed overhead, casting beams of harsh blue light over the crumbling remains of what had once been human districts. Captured fugitives didn't get trials. They vanished into labor camps, or worse. Their minds wiped, repurposed as obedient drones, empty of memory or self. Rowan clutched Sila tighter, feeling the rapid, terrified beat of her heart against his own. There was no time to think, no time to plan, just survive. He veered into a side alley, feet hammering against the cracked pavement. The stink of ozone and refuse filled his lungs. Somewhere far behind them, alarms rose like a tide, swallowing the city's background noise. Above them, searchlights crisscrossed the streets. Drones shrieked their electronic warnings. The city itself turned predatory, hunting its own. Rowan ducked beneath a rusted balcony, half carrying, half dragging Sila into the shelter of shadows. She sagged against him, breathing hard, but when he glanced down, her golden eyes were wide open, burning, alive, still fighting. He had broken the chains today, but if they wanted freedom, if they truly meant to survive, they would have to shatter every chain the Makhtari had ever forged around them. The battle had just begun, and Rowan, for the first time in years, felt the distant electric thrill of hope rising like fire in his blood. They would not go quietly. They would not kneel. Not anymore. The alley swallowed them whole, the city's chaos muffled by crumbling walls and twisted metal. Rowan pressed Sila against the damp brick, shielding her as another drone howled past overhead, its searchlight slicing through the smoke-choked air. His own breathing was ragged, shallow, each breath burning his throat. His side throbbed from where a ricocheted energy blast had grazed him, but the pain was distant, muted by adrenaline. Sila's weight sagged against him, her body trembling with the effort of simply standing. Her skin, fever-warm against the chill night air, was slick with sweat. Blood, dark and almost black under the neon haze, stained the fabric of her tattered clothing where the chains had bitten too deep. Rowan tightened his hold around her waist, feeling the fragile bones beneath her skin, the stubborn strength still vibrating in her muscles. She hadn't surrendered. Not yet. And he wouldn't let her start now. "Keep moving," he murmured, voice rough from smoke and exertion. Sila nodded once, a sharp, determined gesture, and pushed off the wall. Together, they stumbled deeper into the labyrinth of abandoned streets, each step a quiet rebellion against the empire that hunted them. Above them, alarms still screamed. The court would not let this humiliation stand. Runaways were a public insult. An example had to be made. Rowan knew the price of capture, not just death. Obliteration. A mind scrubbed clean and rebuilt to serve until the body broke. A fate worse than the grave. A shiver traced his spine, colder than the night wind. They couldn't afford mistakes. A crumbling maintenance tunnel yawned ahead, half concealed by collapsed debris. Rowan led them inside without hesitation, ducking beneath dangling wires and shattered beams. The darkness pressed close, thick and humid, smelling of rust and stagnant water. They collapsed behind a twisted support column hidden from the street. Rowan finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, though each inhale scraped his ribs raw. His hands moved instinctively, checking Sila for injuries beyond what he could see. Her pulse fluttered against his fingertips, fast but steady. Her breathing was shallow, but she stayed conscious, her golden eyes locked on his with a fierce kind of clarity. "You're hurt," she said, voice low and roughened by exhaustion. Rowan almost laughed. The sound came out broken, like something long rusted loose inside him. "So are you," he replied. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, long enough to feel the gravity pulling between them, raw and undeniable. He dropped his hands first, tearing a strip from his own sleeve to bind the worst of the bleeding along her wrists. His movements were clumsy, too quick, but he forced himself to slow down when she winced. She watched him work, silent, studying him not with fear, but with something closer to understanding. He wondered if she saw the same in him, the cracks running through his armor, the quiet desperation driving his hands. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. Rowan froze. Why? Why had he broken the whip? Why had he chosen today of all days to stop surviving and start fighting? He could have lied. Could have told her it was strategy, a calculated rebellion. But something about the way she looked at him, patient and unflinching, made lying impossible. "I was supposed to teach you obedience," he said, the words scraping his throat raw. "Every time they put that whip in my hand, I told myself it wasn't me, that it didn't matter, that survival was enough." He tightened the bandage around her wrist, knotting it carefully. "But then I saw you," he said, "and I remembered." "Remembered what?" she whispered. Rowan met her eyes, the broken city reflected in the molten gold of her stare. That survival without a soul isn't survival at all. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city above them pulsed and snarled, a living beast searching for its prey. Drone lights flickered across the entrance of the tunnel, too close for comfort. Rowan pulled her closer into the shadows, every instinct screaming for silence. Footsteps clattered across the broken concrete outside. Voices barked commands in clipped alien dialects. The hum of a scanning field passed over the mouth of the tunnel, making the hair on Rowan's arms stand on end. They didn't dare move. He felt Sayla's breath against his neck, shallow and controlled. Her fingers, still trembling, curled into the fabric of his jacket, anchoring herself without even realizing it. Rowan tightened his arm around her shoulders, shielding her as best he could. They waited. Seconds stretched into endless spans of time, each heartbeat thunderous in Rowan's ears. Finally, the search party moved on, swallowed by the maze of ruins. Rowan let out a slow, careful breath. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "They'll sweep back through soon." Sayla nodded against him. She shifted to stand, but her knees buckled. Rowan caught her easily, lifting her to her feet. Her skin was too warm. She was burning up. They needed shelter, real shelter, and supplies. Rowan scanned the tunnel entrance, calculating. He had memorized the city's old schematics during his time as a forced courier. He knew there were pockets of abandoned sectors, places the drone's sensors struggled to reach. They needed to get there before her strength gave out, before his did. "There's a safe zone," he said, more to himself than her. "If we cut through the utility sectors, stay underground, we might make it." Sayla gave a tiny nod, her fingers brushing his wrist in silent agreement. Rowan shifted the satchel he had stolen earlier onto his shoulder, feeling the sharp corner of the stolen medkit press against his back. Not much. Barely enough. But it would have to be. He wrapped an arm firmly around Sayla's waist and they moved, half walking, half staggering deeper into the ruins. Behind them, the city's heart kept beating, mechanical, merciless, alive. Every step forward was a fight against gravity, against despair, against the inevitable. Rowan didn't look back. He had burned that bridge the moment he shattered the whip. Ahead of them, beyond the darkness and the blood-stained streets, was the only thing that mattered now. Freedom, or death trying to reach it. And for the first time in a long, long while, Rowan realized he was willing to die for something more than himself. For her, for both of them. For the chance to break the chains that had bound not just their bodies, but their souls, forever. The ruins stretched out before them like the ribs of a dead beast, crumbling structures rising against the blood-red horizon. The deeper Rowan and Sayla pushed into the forgotten sectors, the more the city seemed to rot around them, abandoned by the ruling caste for newer, cleaner conquests. Rowan led the way, every nerve thrumming with tension, every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. His side ached with every step, but he ignored it. Pain was a currency he had learned to spend without hesitation. Sayla moved at his side, silent but struggling. Her body, weakened by captivity and blood loss, faltered more often now. She caught herself each time with a stubbornness that both inspired and infuriated him. They couldn't afford to slow down, not when the air itself hummed with the hunt. In the distance, faint and growing louder, the low thrum of enforcement drones stirred the heavy night air. Rowan glanced up, catching the blue flicker of searchlights sweeping across the fractured skyline. Every pass brought the deadly machines closer. "We're close," Rowan said, his voice low but certain. He guided them down a narrow stairwell leading underground, into the bones of what had once been a transportation hub. The walls were cracked, the floor littered with debris and forgotten refuse. It smelled of mold and rusted iron. He found a temporary shelter, a maintenance alcove half concealed by collapsed scaffolding. It wasn't much, but it would hide them from a casual scan. For now. Rowan ushered Sayla inside first, then crouched at the entrance, his body a living shield. He listened. Above them, the drones passed. silent death cloaked in cold technology. Rowan exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. Inside the alcove, Sayla slid down against the wall, head tipping back, breath shallow. Her skin was damp with fever. Even in the dim light, Rowan could see how pale she had become beneath her emerald hue. They needed medical supplies, food, water. They needed time they didn't have. Rowan rifled through the stolen satchel, coming up with the battered medkit. His fingers were clumsy, shaking from exhaustion, but he managed to tear open a sanitizing strip and crouch beside her. "This is going to sting," he warned. Sayla nodded, her jaw tight. She didn't flinch as he cleaned the worst of her wounds, though a tremor ran through her muscles with every touch. Her strength was unreal. Rowan didn't waste words. He worked methodically, wrapping gauze around her wrists, sealing the angry welts from the chains. She watched him, those golden eyes steady, unblinking. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. Rowan huffed a breath, not quite a laugh. "Yes, I do." There was no argument in her gaze, only acceptance, and something more, something that caught in Rowan's chest like a hand gripping his heart. He shifted back, inspecting the crude work. It would hold for now. A sudden clang echoed above them, metal on metal. Rowan snapped his head toward the noise, heavy boots striking the ground. Multiple sets, not drones, foot soldiers. The Makhtari's hounds had arrived. Rowan cursed under his breath. They were cutting off the exits, hurting them. They had minutes, maybe less. He rose swiftly, dragging the satchel over his shoulder and extending a hand to Sayla. She gripped it without hesitation. The second she was upright, they moved, slipping through a breach in the far wall into another ruined corridor. Every step was agony, every breath a gamble. The boots grew louder. Rowan risked a glance back. Figures in black armor, faceless, inhuman, spilled into the corridor behind them. Their weapons crackled with lethal energy. "Run," Rowan said, his voice flat with command. Sayla didn't argue. They ran. The corridor twisted and buckled around them, a maze of shattered stone and collapsed infrastructure. Rowan led them with instinct more than memory, weaving through the debris. A shout rang out behind them. Then the sharp hiss of energy rifles charging. Rowan shoved Sayla forward, barely dodging the first volley. Bolts of sizzling plasma exploded against the walls, showering them with dust and shards. They couldn't outrun them forever. Rowan spotted a narrow passage branching off the main corridor, half hidden by a fallen support beam. "There!" he barked. They dove into it just as another volley scorched the air where they had stood seconds before. The passage narrowed, forcing them to squeeze between jagged metal and broken stone. The foot soldiers wouldn't be able to follow easily. It bought them precious seconds. Rowan dragged Sayla along, half carrying her when she stumbled. Behind them the soldiers regrouped, recalibrating. Ahead the passage opened into what must have once been a loading bay, wide, empty, exposed, too exposed. Rowan didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the open space, hauling Sayla with him. His lungs burned, his vision blurred at the edges. Halfway across, the gunfire started again. Rowan twisted, using his own body as a shield. A searing bolt grazed his shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin alike. He staggered but kept moving, teeth gritted against the white-hot pain. Sayla cried out, trying to steady him, but he shook his head fiercely. "Don't stop," he rasped. Another blast cracked past them, and then, suddenly, Rowan stumbled, dropping to one knee. Blood poured freely down his arm. His fingers refused to grip, his vision swam. The soldiers were closing in. Sayla hesitated for half a heartbeat. Then she moved. Without warning, she snatched a length of twisted rebar from the ground, whirled and flung it with frightening precision. The metal bar struck one of the soldiers square in the visor, sending him crashing back with a satisfying clatter. The others hesitated just long enough for Rowan to find his feet again, long enough for them to escape. Rowan grabbed her hand, squeezing it once in silent gratitude, and together they sprinted for the far exit, vanishing into the collapsing ruins. Behind them, the soldiers cursed and regrouped, but Rowan and Sayla didn't look back. They didn't have time for regrets, only survival, only the burning, reckless hope that somehow, they might live long enough to see the sunrise over a world where whips and chains were nothing more than broken relics. And for the first time since the day the Makhtari stole his freedom, Rowan allowed himself to believe. Hope wasn't weakness. Hope was the sharpest weapon he had left. The city had become a labyrinth of broken metal and rising ash. Rowan and Sayla pushed deeper into its forgotten veins. each step a silent prayer for survival. Blood dripped steadily from Rowan's arm, leaving a trail he was too tired to worry about. Behind them, the Mahtari soldiers regrouped, their mechanical hounds sweeping the ruins with merciless precision. Rowan ducked through the skeletal remains of an old marketplace, half carrying Selah beneath a collapsed archway. The scent of burnt electronics and wet stone filled the air, thick enough to choke on. They needed to move faster, but Rowan could feel her strength bleeding away with every ragged breath. They stopped in the shadow of a rusted monorail support. Rowan set Selah down carefully, crouching beside her, scanning the streets for patrols. His pulse thundered against his skull. "You can't keep carrying me," Selah whispered, her voice raw. He glanced at her, taking in the deep flush of fever staining her green skin, the tightness around her eyes. She was slipping and fast. "I can," he said simply. She huffed a breath, something between a laugh and a sob. "You're stubborn." Rowan offered a tight smile. Occupational hazard. For a long moment, they sat there, breathing in the silence, the ruins pressing close around them. "You don't have to stay with me," she said finally, her voice small. "They'll let you live if you leave me." Rowan shifted, crouching so they were eye level. "You think I broke that whip for politics?" he asked, his voice low. "You think I risked everything because it made tactical sense?" Selah blinked, her eyes searching his face. "I did it because once, a long time ago, I forgot what it meant to stand for something," Rowan continued. "I made compromises. I told myself surviving was enough, but it wasn't." He glanced away, jaw clenching. "I was a soldier once, for the Republic, before it fell to the Mahtari, before we all learned what real defeat felt like." The words burned on the way out. He hadn't spoken about it in years. "I watched my brothers and sisters die for a government that signed our deaths away like a bad debt. I survived, and I hated myself for it." He met her gaze again, voice steady now. "I'm done surviving for cowards. If I go down, it's standing beside someone who deserves it." Selah stared at him, something breaking and rebuilding behind her eyes. "You were at Ferex," she said, the words almost a revelation. Rowan nodded once. "The last stand," she whispered. "My father fought there. He never came home." "I'm sorry," Rowan said, and he meant it. Selah shook her head. "He chose it. Better to die free." The crack in her voice almost undid him. Rowan shifted closer, lowering his voice. "And you? Who are you running from?" Selah leaned her head back against the wall, gold eyes catching the dying light. "I was supposed to be a liaison," she said. "My people, what's left of them, were negotiating with the Mahtari, trying to survive. We had rules. No involvement with humans, no resistance." Rowan stiffened slightly but said nothing. "I broke them," she admitted. "I smuggled supplies to resistance cells, passed messages, hid fugitives." Her lips twisted into a bitter smile. "I thought I was careful. I wasn't." She looked at him then, truly looked, as if measuring whether she could trust him with the rest. "They caught me, made an example of me, brought me to that court so I could show everyone how well betrayal is punished." Rowan felt his hands clench into fists without meaning to. "You were brave," he said quietly. "I was stupid," she corrected. He shook his head once. "Brave and stupid are cousins, same blood." A faint smile ghosted across her face. It faded quickly, replaced by grim determination. "I'm not going back," she said. "Neither am I." Above them, another drone shrieked, sweeping its searchlights across the abandoned streets. Rowan cursed under his breath, pulling her to her feet. "We move now. They're closing in." Selah nodded grimly, her body swaying slightly with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. They staggered through the ruins, weaving between collapsed pillars and burned-out vehicles. Every step was a battle against pain and gravity. Ahead, the ruins opened into a shattered plaza. No cover, no mercy. Rowan hesitated at the edge, scanning the skyline. A flash of movement to the right, soldiers deploying, cutting off the alleyways. He calculated quickly. Left, through the debris-choked maintenance tunnels, a harder path but a chance at escape. Right, into the plaza, where death waited in clean formation. No choice, really. "Left," he said, jerking his chin toward the rubble. Selah didn't argue. They plunged into the debris, scrambling over broken concrete and twisted steel. Rowan's wounded arm screamed with every motion, but he gritted his teeth and pushed harder. Behind them, the soldiers shouted, closing in. They crawled through a narrow gap, slipping into the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the city like forgotten veins. It was pitch black inside. Rowan pulled a cracked chem light from the satchel, snapping it to life. A faint green glow filled the tunnel, casting eerie shadows across the walls. They moved as fast as they could, slipping deeper into the guts of the city. At a bend in the tunnel, Rowan halted, pressing Sayla back against the wall. Footsteps echoed ahead, a patrol. Rowan slid the makeshift knife from his belt, the only real weapon they had left. He met Sayla's eyes. She nodded once, steady and unafraid. When the patrol rounded the corner, Rowan moved, fast, efficient. He took the lead soldier down with a brutal slash to the throat, catching the body before it hit the ground. Sayla, despite her injuries, grabbed a fallen rifle and turned it expertly on the second soldier, a flash of old training surfacing in her movements. The second body dropped. Silence fell, broken only by the drip of water from the cracked pipes above. Rowan crouched over the bodies, stripping weapons and gear with practiced hands. He tossed a pistol to Sayla. She caught it one-handed, checking the charge without needing instruction. "You've done this before," he said, voice low. Sayla's mouth curved into something dark and familiar. "I wasn't always a diplomat's daughter." Rowan smiled grimly. He liked her more every minute. Together, they loaded the stolen weapons and pressed deeper into the darkness. Above them, the Makhtari city boiled and raged, unaware that two fugitives were slipping through its broken heart, for now. But Rowan knew this was only the beginning. They had defied the court, broken their chains, declared war with nothing but blood and will, and they would finish what they had started, even if it cost them everything. The tunnels bled into darkness, growing colder and more constricted with every turn. Rowan led the way, his stolen rifle slung over one shoulder, the light from his cracked chem stick barely cutting through the gloom. Sayla moved behind him, silent, steady, though he could feel the tremor in her steps. They needed a place to regroup, not just a hiding spot, shelter, a place where Sayla could rest without fear of being dragged back into the Makhtari's chains. Rowan found it in the ruins of an old freight station, long abandoned, its security systems eaten away by rust and time. A collapsed wall had sealed off one entrance, leaving only a narrow passage barely wide enough for a human to slip through. Perfect. He motioned Sayla inside first, then squeezed through behind her, wincing as his wounded arm protested. Inside, the space was musty, but dry. Debris was piled against the walls, and the remnants of ancient cargo crates leaned drunkenly in the corners. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. It would have to do. Rowan propped a crate against the entrance for added cover, then turned to Sayla. She was already sinking to the ground, her body giving out now that the adrenaline was fading. Without a word, Rowan shrugged off the satchel and knelt beside her, digging through it for the salvaged supplies. He produced a dented canteen and pressed it into her hands. "Drink," he said. She obeyed without argument, taking slow, careful sips. Rowan watched her, the shadows casting strange patterns across her face, highlighting the hollow beneath her cheekbones, the stubborn tilt of her jaw. When she finished, she lowered the canteen and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her fingers shook. "You should rest," Rowan said, voice softer now. Sayla shook her head. "Not safe yet?" Rowan smiled grimly. "It's never safe, but you're no good to me half dead." She raised an eyebrow. "To you?" He shrugged. Figure of speech. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It didn't last, but it was enough to make something tighten in Rowan's chest. He busied himself setting up a perimeter, laying shards of broken glass and metal across the entrance so they'd hear if anyone tried to breach it. When he finished, he sank down across from her, rifle resting across his lap. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the city breathe above them. Finally Sayla spoke. "You didn't ask about my people," she said. Rowan met her gaze. "You'd tell me if you wanted to." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if approving some unspoken decision. "My father was part of the old alliance," she said quietly. "Before the Makhtari came, he believed in unity. Humans, Illyrians, the others, all standing together." Rowan listened without interrupting. "But after the Republic fell, everything changed. My world closed its borders. Pretended neutrality was survival. They outlawed contact with humans, called it treason. She traced a pattern on the dusty floor with one finger, her expression far away. I watched them trade principles for comfort, watched them turn away from allies. I couldn't stomach it, so I didn't. Her hand stilled. I broke the laws, smuggled food, medicine, information, hid human refugees in my family's own estate. She smiled bitterly. They called me a traitor, stripped me of my name, my rights, my future. The Makhtari didn't even have to catch me. My own people delivered me to them, tied with a bow. Rowan felt a slow, cold rage stir inside him. You're better off without them, he said. Sayla's lips quirked, but there was no humor in it. Maybe, she said, but it still hurts, losing a home you thought would fight for you. Rowan nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. Home, he said, his voice a low rasp. Home is a battlefield now, and it doesn't forgive. Sayla's eyes softened slightly. And you? She asked. Rowan leaned his head back against the wall, staring up at the cracked ceiling. I was a soldier, born and raised for it. The Republic trained me to fight, to follow orders, to protect. His mouth twisted. But when the Makhtari came, the Senate surrendered before the first battle was lost. They signed our surrender in the same breath they condemned us. He dragged a hand through his hair, exhaustion weighting every movement. I fought anyway. I led raids, rescued civilians, blew bridges, sabotaged convoys. Every time we won a skirmish, they crushed a dozen others in retaliation. He closed his eyes briefly. In the end, it wasn't just the enemy we lost to. It was our own leaders, our own fear. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not empty. Finally, Sayla whispered, "You didn't lose." Rowan looked at her. "You're still fighting." For a moment, the weight on his shoulders lightened, just a fraction. He allowed himself to believe it. Rest, he said, shifting to sit closer to the entrance. I'll keep watch. She hesitated, then nodded, curling up against the wall, one hand still resting on the pistol he'd given her. Within minutes, her breathing evened out, her body sagging into exhausted sleep. Rowan watched the dark rifle across his knees, ears straining for any sound of pursuit. The city groaned and shifted above them, a wounded giant never fully dying. They were fugitives in a dying world, outlaws against an empire that owned the stars. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Rowan didn't feel alone. For the first time, hope didn't feel like a betrayal. He tightened his grip on the rifle. Let the Makhtari come. He would meet them here, in the dark, and they would learn that broken chains could become the deadliest weapons of all. Rowan sat in the dark, rifle across his knees, listening to the broken breathing of a city that had long since forgotten how to dream. Above them, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a scrape against old concrete, the faint hum of distant engines throttling down. Rowan stiffened, every muscle locking into readiness. He leaned forward, straining to hear beyond the steady thrum of his own pulse. Another sound, a soft, metallic clatter against the debris at the tunnel entrance. He rose silently, crossing the shelter in 3 long strides. Sayla stirred but didn't fully wake, her body too wrung out to react. Rowan positioned himself between her and the noise, leveling his rifle at the entrance. The perimeter he had laid, the shards of broken glass, remained untouched. No careless step. Whoever was coming, they knew how to move. That was worse. Through the fractured concrete, he caught flashes of black armor and the glint of rifle barrels. Soldiers, at least 4, maybe more. Rowan gritted his teeth, shifting his weight into a firing stance. His wounded arm protested sharply, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar. Pain was honest. They couldn't stay pinned down. Not here. They had to move. Now he turned, crossed to Sayla, and crouched beside her. His hand touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Wake up," he whispered. She blinked, groggy, but years of survival had carved instincts deep into her bones. She was fully alert within seconds, sitting up with the pistol already in hand. "They found us," Rowan said. She didn't ask how bad it was. She didn't waste breath cursing the gods or fate. She simply nodded and stood, swaying only slightly. Rowan felt a brief, fierce swell of admiration for her. He slung the satchel onto his back, checked the rifle's charge, and moved to the side entrance they hadn't sealed. The emergency bolt hole he had found earlier in case things went wrong. They were about to. The first shots ripped through the main wall, scorching trails of molten concrete and debris into the room. Rowan grabbed Sayla's hand and pulled her after him, diving into the narrow passage. The world exploded behind them. Dust and shrapnel hammered their backs as they fled through the crumbling service corridor. Rowan led them blind, instinct and desperation guiding his steps. Shots cracked past his ears. A shout echoed through the tunnel. Orders barked in the harsh Makhtari dialect. Rowan spun, dropping to one knee, and fired a burst down the passage. One of the black-armored soldiers crumpled, falling hard. Another volley of energy blasts lanced the walls around them, burning the air. Rowan felt a line of fire sear his left thigh, stumbled, but forced himself upright. "Keep going!" he barked, shoving Sayla ahead of him. She didn't hesitate. She ran. Another turn. Another collapsed stairwell. They burst into an open maintenance atrium, a cavernous space where broken machinery hung like the bones of dead titans. Cover, finally. Rowan pulled Sayla behind a fallen girder just as the soldiers flooded the room. He had 6 rounds left, maybe less. He glanced at Sayla. She crouched beside him, pistol steady in her hands, golden eyes blazing with fierce determination. "We don't have enough firepower," she said, voice low. Rowan smirked grimly. "Never stopped me before." He leaned around the girder, sighted, and fired. Another soldier dropped, armor sparking. But there were more. Too many. Return fire hammered their cover, sending shards of rusted metal shrieking into the air. They needed a way out, fast. Rowan's mind raced. Above them, rusted catwalks crisscrossed the ceiling, half collapsed, but still hanging by the thick support cables. He looked at Sayla. She followed his gaze and immediately understood. "Drop it," she said. Rowan nodded. He slung the rifle across his back and pulled the salvage plasma grenade from his belt. He had one shot. He primed the grenade, set the timer for 3 seconds, and hurled it upward. The grenade arced high, struck the tangled cables, and detonated. The explosion shattered the silence like a hammer through glass. The catwalks groaned, twisted, and came crashing down in a maelstrom of metal and dust. The soldiers below scattered too late. Screams echoed through the atrium, cut off sharply as the wreckage buried them. Rowan grabbed Sayla's hand again and ran, weaving through the chaos, ducking beneath falling debris. An opening yawned ahead, a maintenance shaft leading deeper underground. He didn't hesitate. They dove inside, sliding down the broken service ladder as the world above them crumbled. They hit the bottom hard, rolling into the filthy runoff tunnels beneath the city. The smell hit them instantly, stagnant water, rust, and rot. But Rowan barely noticed. He staggered to his feet, dragging Sayla upright. "Come on," he rasped. "Not much farther." She nodded, pale but unbroken. They stumbled onward through the darkness, bruised and bleeding, but alive, for now. Above them, the Makhtari forces would already be regrouping, tracking them. But Rowan didn't care. They had survived. Together. That was enough. For now, that was everything. They would find the others, the whispers of resistance cells still hiding in the ruins. They would rebuild. Rowan tightened his grip on Sayla's hand, feeling the tremor of her exhaustion, the stubborn life still burning in her. No chains, no cages, only blood and defiance, and a promise he had carved into his soul the moment he shattered the whip. They would be free, or they would die making sure no one ever forgot they fought. The tunnels gave way to open earth, rough and broken, where the city's bones faded into the wild wastelands beyond. Rowan and Sayla emerged under a bruised sky, the horizon burning with the false dawn of a world forever scarred by war. The air here smelled different, no longer choked with the bitter metal of civilization, but rougher, cleaner, like stone scraped raw by the wind. They moved carefully, half crawling, half stumbling across the barren slope until the ruins of the city were little more than jagged silhouettes against the blood-red light. Rowan's body screamed for rest. His wounded leg dragged with every step. The stolen satchel felt like an anchor pulling at his shoulders. But Sayla pressed onward beside him, her hand gripping his arm whenever he faltered, her presence a constant tether keeping him upright. He had never owed his life to anyone before. He wasn't sure if it was gratitude he felt, or something deeper, something more dangerous. Ahead, a cluster of blackened rock formations twisted up from the ground like a fortress built by the earth itself. Rowan guided them toward it, heart hammering. Somewhere inside, if the whispers were true, the resistance still survived, broken, scattered, but breathing. That was all they needed. Rowan slowed as they reached the outcropping. His hand signaled Sayla to stay low, her pistol already drawn and ready. He scanned the shadows, searching for the signal he had been taught years ago, before everything fell apart. A small flicker, 2 short flashes of green light. Rowan exhaled, tension bleeding from his shoulders. He returned the signal with a flash of his own. Moments later, a figure detached from the rocks. Lean, masked, rifle pointed but not raised to fire. Another followed, then a third. Rowan stepped forward, hands open. "Name," the first demanded, voice muffled behind a breather mask. "Rowan Hart," he said. "Former Republic Infantry, 5th Assault Division." The soldier hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. "Proof?" Rowan pulled back his sleeve, revealing the old Republic tattoo, faded and scarred but unmistakable. Another nod. "Bring them in," the soldier barked. Relief threatened to buckle Rowan's knees, but he forced himself steady. He turned back, helping Scylla to her feet. Her skin was pale under the dust and bruises, but her golden eyes were sharp with awareness. Together, they followed the soldiers into the rocks. Inside, the earth opened into a hollowed-out cavern, lit with scavenged lights and ringed with makeshift defenses. People moved in and out of the shadows, scarred, hollow-eyed, but alive. Humanity's last fragments, still fighting. As they entered, Rowan felt dozens of eyes fall on them. Mistrust, hope, fear, all simmering together. The lead soldier, captained by the markings on his torn jacket, turned to them. "You're lucky you weren't shot on sight," he said. "Makhtari patrols sweep this area every day." Rowan inclined his head. "Not luck," he said. "Choice." The captain grunted, something like approval in the sound. He nodded toward a medic station cobbled together from scavenged tech. "Get yourselves patched up. After that, command will want to talk." Rowan nodded once, grateful for the reprieve. He and Scylla made their way to the medics, tired but unbroken. The worst wounds were treated quickly. Rowan's leg, Scylla's infected wrists. They were given clean water, thin soup, and a place to sit where the cracked concrete floor didn't dig into open wounds. For the first time in what felt like days, Rowan let himself breathe. Scylla sat beside him, her hair falling across her face in wild, tangled waves. She caught him watching and offered a faint, weary smile. "You're staring," she said. "Making sure you're still breathing," Rowan answered, the corners of his mouth tugging upward. Scylla laughed softly, a sound that cracked through the exhaustion and fear like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You're terrible at subtlety," she said. Rowan shrugged. Subtlety never kept anyone alive. They sat in silence for a while, the rough murmur of the camp around them weaving a thin cocoon of fragile peace. Finally, Rowan shifted closer. "We made it," he said, voice low. Scylla met his eyes, and for a moment everything else, the Makhtari, the broken world, the endless war, faded. There was only her and him, and the raw, stubborn heartbeat of survival that had carried them this far. "No chains," she said quietly, as if testing the words on her tongue. Rowan reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the terrifying tenderness curling inside his chest. "No chains," he echoed. "Not between them, not anymore." He let his hand drop, but Scylla caught it, her fingers curling around his in a grip that was soft and sure and unshakable. For the first time in a long, bitter lifetime, Rowan allowed himself to hope for something more than survival. He allowed himself to believe in something stronger than rage or grief, freedom, trust, a future. The war would rage on. The Makhtari would hunt them until their last breath. But Rowan knew this. Whatever came next, they would face it together. No chains, no masters, only the fierce, unbreakable bond they had forged in the fires of betrayal and blood and defiance. Together they were unstoppable. Together they were free. Days passed, then more. The rhythm of life in the resistance camp shifted from desperate survival to something resembling hope. Small victories stitched together the gaping wounds left by years of oppression. Communications hubs once severed flickered back to life. Supply lines grew thicker. New faces arrived, stragglers, survivors, fighters carrying nothing but the will to stand and resist. It was far from over. Every day, scouts reported Makhtari movements pressing against the borders. Every night, silent funerals were held under the stars for those who didn't make it back. But for the first time in a generation, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting back, and they were winning. Rowan stood at the edge of the camp, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching a group of young recruits build new barricades. Their laughter floated on the breeze, clumsy and bright. Hope, stubborn as weeds, had rooted itself in the rubble. The human resistance had survived. Not just survived, grown. Since Rowan and Sayla had stumbled into the hollow of the rocks, others had followed. Survivors, fighters, families, scientists and soldiers, and once ordinary people who refused to bow. Every day brought more. They weren't an army, not yet, but they were something stronger than an army, a promise, a beginning. Rowan felt Sayla's presence before he heard her steps. She moved like sunlight now, quiet, inevitable, carrying warmth wherever she went. He turned just as she reached him, her green skin catching the light in soft, luminous shades. Her black hair was loose around her shoulders, tamed only by the simple leather cord she'd tied at the nape of her neck. There were still bruises fading on her wrists. There were still wounds hidden deeper. But she stood tall, unbowed. Rowan smiled as she stopped beside him, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body against his side. She followed his gaze, watching the others work. The new walls rise, the new lives beginning. "They're stubborn," she said softly. Rowan chuckled. "They're human." Sayla smiled, the corners of her mouth lifting in that small, quiet way that always made his chest tighten. "And Illyrian," she added pointedly, nudging him lightly with her elbow. "And Illyrian," Rowan agreed. They fell into an easy silence, the kind that spoke more than words ever could. After a while, Sayla turned toward him, her face open, unguarded. Her golden eyes searched his, not for answers, but for the truth already written there. "Rowan," she said, voice low but sure. He met her gaze without flinching. "I love you," she said. The words weren't rushed. They weren't pretty, wrapped up in ribbon and ceremony. They were raw and real, shaped by the fire they had walked through together. Rowan felt the breath leave his lungs, not in fear, but in something fierce and overwhelming, and entirely new. He stepped closer, lifting a hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. Her skin was warm beneath his touch, alive with everything they had fought to keep. "I love you too," he said, voice rough with everything he couldn't put into words. Sayla leaned into his hand, her eyes closing for a heartbeat, and when they opened again, there was no hesitation between them. He kissed her then. It wasn't desperate or frantic like the battles they had survived. It was slow, certain, the claiming of something that had already been theirs long before either had dared to speak it aloud. When they parted, the world felt quieter, the air heavier with meaning. Rowan rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. "We'll build something here," he whispered, "something that can't be broken." Sayla nodded against him, her hands curling into the fabric of his jacket. "Together," she said. Behind them, the camp buzzed with life, children laughing, old soldiers arguing over strategy, engineers cobbling together ancient tech into something half-workable. It wasn't perfect. The Makhtari still ruled the skies. The cities still burned under their iron hand. But here, in this broken place, freedom had found a foothold. Rowan and Sayla stood at its heart. No chains, no masters, only each other. And the long, hard, beautiful road ahead, together.